Welcome to day two of our $1 million game breakdown. Today we're going to be looking at the day that I played on the show, buying in for $1 million. We're going to talk about a couple of hands I was in, a couple of hands that I saw at the table, certainly some spicy ones, so it should be a fun review. Also, at the end of the video, there were a couple subjects that I want to talk about, so stay tuned for that as well. We currently have a $25 off Lucid GTO coupon with code DON'TPUNT, which we actually managed to not do, so that's always great. Head on over now for 25 bucks off of our new software training program at upswingpoker.com. And finally, the Mega Monster coming back to Lodge Card Club, just 400 bucks gets you a shot at a $1 million prize pool. Coming out and play, last year this thing was massive, and I'm hoping it is again because I'm tired of having to pay out overlay. It's a lot less fun when you run the room. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the $1 million game. First hand that I played on the day of any real size, I opened pocket fours here under the gun. Dwan decides to flat in the big blind with pocket eights, definitely standard. And we take a flop of ace, five, deuce, two clubs, one spade. Tom checks. So I know in heads up, and I've not really done very much ring study. By very much, I mean basically any ring study. But I do know in heads up that in these spots you tend to play pretty low frequency bet on the flop with a very small size. I could see an argument for that here as well, but you could also maybe argue that because my opening range has so many aces, I should actually be betting here quite often. I'm not entirely sure. Either way, pocket fours is a hand that can certainly play nicely in both categories. Definitely have some playability if I check back, but then also if I bet, I could knock out some overcard hands. So I decided to do a little bit of both here, and I ultimately end up on check. The turn is an 8. This is where things get kind of interesting. Tom decides to go ahead and bet the turn with a set, definitely standard, a little over half pot, 55-60% pot. Now with pocket fours, so this is an interesting spot. I would imagine that both options again are fine here. Maybe even lean fold, right? Because we can have so many club hands that want to continue. That said, I kind of like this hand in terms of how it plays if I do float, because if I call, I'm going to have plenty of club hands to represent should a fourth club come in. But if I hit the straight or the 4, it's going to be very disguised that my hand is strong as it is, and my opponent is likely going to bet on those turns and rivers. So I think this is close either way. My game plan: call, bluff clubs, and value bet if I hit the straight or the set. River comes another club. Now 4 clubs. The queen is the nuts. So plenty of strong clubs. I could have pocket queens, pocket jacks, pocket tens, ace, few aces, ace, jack, ace 10 with a club type hands as well. And Tom checks it over to me with his set of 8s, definitely standard. Here, this is the game plan we're planning on executing. I think I have a lot more of the high clubs than Tom has here. Queens, jacks, 10s, some of the ace-x kind of hands that I mentioned before, all are hands that would want to be betting, and they'd want to bet big here. So my game plan is go quite polar, trying to go 1.5x pot. I ended up going slightly larger than that and bet 30,000 here on the river with my pocket fours. You know, the only thing I will say about this spot, it is kind of easy to think about bluffs, right? Hands without a club that might want to bet now, just given the run out. Maybe I did have an ace, although that hand would probably check back. Maybe I could have a hand like, jacks no club and decide to call turn. So that aspect I don't love of this forest bluff. On the other hand, I do have a ton of value here, and a good general rule of thumb at home if you're trying to play good poker, if you're in a spot where you can definitely have a lot of value and you have a pretty weak hand, I think just generally speaking, betting in these situations and putting your opponent to the test is probably better than just taking your showdowns that are very unlikely to win. And if he check calls this river, very unlikely that I win. And it's hard to imagine bluffs that he'd bet turn and give up this river. He'd have to have like 7-6 of without a club and then check river. It's just too unlikely. Fours really just don't have any showdown value. So anyway, long story short, I bet $30,000 into $18,000, and once again, right off the bat, we are in the position of bluffing the rivers. Tom Dwan on $1 million game, and Tom thinking it over and ultimately making the right decision. Next hand, I am in the straddle with King 8 of hearts. Decided to try and straddle and get this game going. And then no one else straddled afterwards, so it did not work out. But we do put the straddle on with the King 8 suited here. Hands opens it up in the hijack with ace 9 of spades. Peter calls on the button. Tom calls in the big blind, and with King 8 suited in the straddle, I think either way is okay. I think you could argue for a squeeze occasionally with suited king, but you definitely mainly want to be calling here. Obviously you're getting great odds with a pretty good hand. We do decide to call, and let's take a flop. Flop comes Queen 10-9 Rainbow. Huge flop for a lot of players. So we've got second nut straight for Dwan. We got top two for Peter. We got a gutter with a backdoor flush draw for me. And then we have a bottom pair and backdoor nut flush draw for hands. So everyone gets at least a little bit of this flop, which is interesting. Usually at least one person has missed entirely. But regardless, action checks to Peter on the button. He goes for a very small flop bet, just 6,000 into 28. And Tom calls. Interesting spot here with King 8. I do think we've got a classic poker hands. All options are on the table. We are getting a great price, so you could argue just to float, try and hit a straight or the backdoor flush. Maybe even a king could potentially win. You could argue that this hand's still just a fold. We don't have a particularly good draw, and even if the price is cheap, we don't close the action. Then you could also argue for the third option of raise. Kind of like raise here because the straights are king jack and jack 8. A lot of times a nice bluff hand, if you're looking for check raise run it bluff type hands, are going to be hands like this one because you block both sides of the straight. It's also going to give you a hand that will make a lot of sense to bluff if the 8 rolls off on the turn or river. You can represent the jack, and of course you're going to have plenty of straights. I'm going to be calling king jack offsuit every time in the straddle, as well as jack 8 every time in the straddle. So I have tons of straights. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the straight I had versus Phil Hellmuth when I had 10-7. That kind of idea where we're going to have tons of straights in these spots, so we definitely want to be check raising some bluffs as well. Anyway, I make it 32,000. Both players call. I think maybe once in a blue moon we could be looking to barrel some turns and rivers, but my game plan here now really is just if I turn a heart, barrel, otherwise I'm going to check fold. My logic is simple. I think I just have better bluffs. When two people call you, you just need to have some good equity to continue to barrel. I can have ace jack on the turn. Really, that's actually about the only better bluff, but ace jack is tremendously better to barrel than king 8. I guess I could have like jack 7 of spades, stuff like that. There's a few bluffs. So on the turn club, Tom checks to me. I decide that I'm just going to be giving this one up. I'll make one note. Usually club hands are the best to barrel the turn because you unblock the backdoor flush draw floats. So it's better to bluff here with a hand like king 8 of clubs because it's more likely people have one of the backdoor flush draws and are just a little bit more likely to float with those. So just things to think about that don't really matter that much, but nonetheless. So anyway, Tom checks. I'm done with this hand. I check. Peter now decides to check back quite quickly with top 2. Interesting spot here for Peter. I do think you mainly want to be betting, but you certainly also want to mix in some checks. So I totally fine to do both. He does decide to check, and we take a river, which is the money card for Peter. Finally, the man catches a break in the $1 million game, rivering the stone cold nuts. At this point, Tom with a straight. It's kind of an interesting spot, I think, because I'm pretty likely to just have nothing when I check raise the flop and then check this turn. I can occasionally have a boat or occasionally king jack, but I wouldn't be too worried about my hand. I'm mainly just going to be folding versus bets. The question is, how often does jack 8 have Peter beat? Well, Peter is never going to have king jack. That's not going to check back the turn. So it's just a question of how often does Peter have a boat. Queen 10 probably mainly bets turn, but Queen 10 is possible. Queen 9, maybe a hand I would be thinking about a little bit as one of the most likely boats. But regardless, not too many boats. So I do like a bet here from Tom on the river. I don't mind a small 1/3 pot size. I don't mind a bigger 2/3 pot size. Anything bigger than that, I think starts to probably get to be a little bit too big. He does decide to go a little under 2/3 pot, which seems good. Now, this is where it just, for the I don't even know how many times so far $1 million game. Dwan bets the river for value, and Peter carves out some chips and bumps it up, and Tom's life is in the pure blender. With the straight here, I don't know what you do. It is tough. I think I'd rather have a queen. If I'm in Tom's shoes, I could definitely be betting the river with ace queen. That said, maybe it's possible Peter raises ace queen himself. I think it's pretty unlikely. So the reason I like to have a queen here more than a straight is when I have a straight, my opponent's just representing a boat. So I'd rather block the boat than the straight. Um, Jack 8 has no blockers really that are important to the situation, whereas if you had ace queen, you do. Tom can also have tens, nines, queen 10 himself. If he's calling Jack 8, obviously it's queen 9 as well. So I think we're just low enough in our range where we can fold. And I do want to just take a moment just to pause and say this is one of those things that happens when you play versus recreational players. And I'm guilty of it. We're all guilty of it to some extent. Just because someone's a rec doesn't mean you want to start just bet calling everything. In fact, a lot of times rec players will raise lefts often as bluffs. I think this would have been a really good spot for Tom to just bet fold and say, you know what, whatever, man. If you bluff me here, you bluff me here. But uh, it's a three-way river, and he's been paying off in the spot over and over again. At some point, I think a prudent bet fold might not be amiss. But Tom decides otherwise and does make the call, and the beatdown continues in the Peter versus Tom Dwan matchup. Next up, we have another hand that I played here, opening up 7-5 suited under the gun. By the way, under the gun is six-handed, so it's not like I'm opening this up in a ring game. This is the hijack. A little bit loose, but with 2K ante, and it's actually just standard, I think. I open a 3K, hands to my left, decides to 3-bet the hijack. I guess we're six-handed, so yes, that makes sense. So I am under the gun 6-max online kind of position. Hands 3-bets the hijack to 10K, back to me. I think it's pretty close pre-flop. I really don't hate either way, but I come onto these shows to play some hands, so we decide to call, let's take a flop. King 4-3, 2 spades, a beautiful flop here for 7-5. 6 of spades would give us the straight flush. 6 gives us the nuts, spade gives us a flush. We've got a very nice semi-bluff type hand. I check and hands decides to bet. Now this is an interesting spot because sometimes on king high boards like this, you don't really do much check raising. And the reason is because you don't have a ton of value bets that want to raise. I don't think that's the case here because if I have ace king, I'm doing a lot of flatting pre-flop versus the 3-bet. We talked about this in the other video, how just because you don't 4-bet a value bet doesn't mean you're scared money. Ace king does mix flat pre. And when you do flat ace king, you can then check raise king high boards. And I hate referencing tons of other hands. I know I referenced the Helmuth hand earlier when I said I can have 10-7 on that queen king 8 hand. But I played a hand on the Lodge live stream where I had ace king, early position, called a 3-bet versus British Bulldog, and the flop king high, and I check raised him on almost this exact board. It was very very similar situation. So I check raised, barrel turn, and then the river was a board pairing king. It's an incredibly similar hand. I'm not sure if we're going to define that for this stream or not, but I basically ended up winning a few hundred K pot from Bulldog where he floated me with a straight draw and I had ace king. Long-winded way of saying that I do think that some check raising here makes some sense compared to maybe in 100 big blinds where you don't really have ace king in your pre-flop range. Anyways, he bet 7K, about 1/3 pot, a little bit less. We check raise to 26,000. I'm planning on sometimes calling with this hand too. I think we prefer raise, right? Because anything that folds was ahead of us. We knock out their equity. And of course, we have a really, really strong draw. Back over to hands, ace queen with a spade. I think floating the flop does make some sense here. A couple ways of thinking about this. I guess to start off with, you have the ace of spades. I actually kind of think the ace of spades is maybe not a great card because you want to have, you'd rather have me have more draws. And when you have the ace of spades, I can't have the nut flush draw. If I'm check raising here, I have straight draws or flush draws are my main bluffs. Maybe a hand like ace-5 suited, maybe a hand like 6-5 suited, 7-5 suited, 7-6 suited, spades and non-spades, all hands that could be looking to check raise. And then of course I also have my value bets, hands like pocket fours, pocket threes, ace king, maybe a little bit king queen, maybe some king x of spades. So all in all, it seems close on the flop. I don't mind either way from hands. Anyway, he does decide to call, take a turn, and it is an offsuit jack. This is not a great card for me because hands has way more hands that interact with the jack. He can have king jack for sure, whereas I'm not check raising king jack unless it's spades. Also, he has pocket jacks for sure in this line, and I never do. I would never check raise this flop with pocket jacks. It would just be suicide. What am I doing? So, all those things said, a lot of times when you check raise these flops and you barrel the turn, you might overbet. In this one, I think you want to go for pot. I think a pot size wager. I think a low frequency check could be okay, but I don't really think this is a spot I want to double check raise because I don't really have pocket kings or jacks, and he does. I don't really have king jack. So I guess the way I'd play this spot is do a lot of barreling for value or as a bluff. Do some check folding with some airball hands. I don't really want to barrel the turn, like a 7-5, 7-5 of heart to be a really great example of check raise check. And then barrel my equity, barrel my value bets, and look to play some rivers. So I try to bet pot. It's hard out there, guys, to calculate the pot. I bet 78,000 into 76,000, and back over to hands now with a gut shot. I think we're pretty close on the turn. That said, with the stack depth drawing to the nuts, I do think we have a call. I feel better about calling the turn, actually, I think, than the flop. You got some playability on a spade. We have a 10 to the nuts. And I think it's close on the turn. These are both close, but I do think call is fine. Hands does make the call, 232k. We're going to a river, and unfortunately it bricks out with the offsuit king. God, this hand's so similar to that hand I played at the lodge. Anyway, so on the king, a lot of stuff running through my head. To start off with, I think this is a card where lots of checking happens because on this card, it doesn't actually. I'm talking myself out of this. Taking a step back. My value bet going into this river was basically king jack of spades or king x of spades and some ace king and then the sets. I think ace king, king jack type hands really like to check the river because you block so much of his value and it's so likely he has a bluff. So those hands don't love betting and certainly don't love betting big. And I know I would check those because I did that. I did that in this exact spot before when I was playing in a game like this. That said, pocket fours, pocket threes are going to want to barrel because you want to get value from king x, ace king, king queen, maybe a hand like aces. So this is a long-winded way of saying that I think you should do some barreling here, but you want to be pretty selective with the bluffs, and you want to be mainly barreling when you have the non-king x value. So I only get a few combos of bluffs if that's the case. And I'm definitely going to be able to have 6-5 here, which seems like the really natural bluff. I'm going to open 6-5 suited. I'm going to call a 3-bet with it. I'm going to do lots of flop check raising with that. I'm going to be barreling the turn. So I think when I have the spade hands, I think I just want to check fold. I want hands to have 7-6 of spades, 7-5 of spades, ace-7 of spades, ace-5, all these spade hands. I just don't like bluffing this hand. I'm sure occasionally it does bluff. It's probably okay too, but I think in this spot we like a 2/3 pot bet, or maybe even a pot size bet in that range, and we want to use our non-flush draw bluffs with our sets. So I check, I give up, hands checks back, and it is really unfortunate when usually he's got the ace high, because if I'd barreled, I'm pretty sure that he is going to be folding the river, but I don't think there's anything we can really do about that. If we fire this hand, we're going to fire so many hands, and as someone that I think is maybe a little bit too bluffy at times, I try to, when I can see good reasons to not bluff, I try to touch into those. So we check river, he checks back, we lose to ace high, and once again, $1 million game, off to a great start with some really weak hands not getting folds, and the session continues. Our next hand is the sickest hand of the day, and the pre-flop action is a little tough because they were doing a cutaway of the beautiful scene outside of Hustler from the drone shot. But when we come back, we see Action Dan has, I believe, raised the small blind with pocket sevens. I can't say exactly, guys, because I don't see the pre-flop action in this hand. No one can, but I assume the action went Peter opens the button with king 7 suited. Steve calls the big blind. No. Action Dan 3-bets the small blind. Steve calls the big blind. Peter calls the button. It's got to be something like that. Just bear with me. That sounds the most reasonable. Anyway, flop comes king 7-4. Massive, Massive cooler here for Peter, finally on the wrong end of this. Actually, actually, it's got to be the straddle because Steve goes first and he checks it over. Um, if Peter's the button, Steve's got to be the small blind, Dan's got to be the big blind, Peter's the button. We got there. Okay. Anyway, Steve checks. Dan here definitely got to bet the flop. I like a 1/3 pop bet. Get the party going. Three-way. Strong hand. He goes bigger, goes for the 18 to 31. One thing I want to say too, guys, I've seen a lot of this in this game this week. I've seen a lot of people just using sizes that when they have a better hand, they go bigger. I'd recommend not doing that. I'd recommend just, playing a good strategy. Really great advice there from me. Anyway, so that's 18 to 31. Again, could be some exploit stuff, who knows. 18K to 31 to Peter with top two. I think this is a spot. It's actually kind of interesting. If Peter faces a small bet, you definitely want to mainly raise. As the bet gets bigger and there's a third guy in the hand, you kind of like to call more. I could see good arguments both ways. I don't mind raising in Peter's spot. I don't mind calling. You should probably do some of both. As usual, some great advice here. Just don't you love mixing hands, guys? Anyway, Peter does decide to raise, making a 68,000 big raise from Peter here on the flop, looking to get some value. What do I think of this size? Size seems a little big, but probably okay. Maybe a little big. It's a little big. Anyway, over to Dan now, sevens. Very interesting spot with pocket sevens here, $1 million deep. What are you going to do here? I think I like calling. On a board like this, King 7-4, you're not going to have that many value bets as the 3-better. Of course, you can occasionally have pocket sevens and then get some idiot to float you with 5-4 of spades and then raise when they turn a straight draw and barrel off when it bricks into your boat. So that could happen, hypothetically speaking. It's not happened before in the $1 million game. Anyway, back to the hand. I think I like call. I think this is a spot where you play your whole range from call, let him barrel, let's evaluate turns and rivers, and then we can play our hand out of our range on later streets. Dan does decide he is going to make the call. We take a turn. Another 4. Finally, Dan's going to win a big one with a boat now against Peter. Draws are dead. Full house is going to win this hand one way or another. And Peter bets 150K into 170K. Massive bet here from Peter. I think it's a little too big. I like 2/3 pot from Peter. It's not a great card for you with King 7 because now ace is ahead of you. If your opponent floated you with a 4, it's unlikely but possible they're ahead of you. So I would have gone 2/3 prop. What are you going to do? Action Dan makes the call, and man, what a river. I mean, holy shit, what a river. King on the river, top boat for Peter. That's just crazy. I mean, my lord, what a run out. Peter now decides to bet and bets 250 into what, 460, something like that. 480, 460. I think this is a little too small from Peter. You know what? So there's two strategies here. Peter can use a size where he's trying to stack a king, or he can use a size where he's trying to put hands that are not a king in a tough spot. So I guess half pot, a little more than half pot kind of makes sense from there, from that perspective, but half pot's fine. I'll take it back. Half pot's okay. Because if you start being too big, then they fold everything other than a king. And a king should raise anyway. I like maybe a little smaller, actually. I like 1/3 pot here. Your opponent will raise a king. You can jam it. And, well, I don't know, man. I'm talking myself in circles. I'm not the expert in this spot. I can see some different arguments. Anyway, so over to Action Dan now. Look, guys, this has happened to all of us where shit's falling apart, you know. You're losing your pots, you're running bad, you're getting cooler, you get all this shit, and then another hand happens, like, my god. But I really think you gotta fold here. If I'm Action Dan, I can have ace king, king queen, king jack suited, king 10 suited, king 9 suited, pocket 4s, pocket kings. I know that it's not a ton of hands, but you have so many kings. Your main hand is a king because you're not going to call nearly as many draws on the board pairing turn. You mainly have a king. So on this river, you're protected. You have so many good hands. Sevens is much lower in your range now. I mean, it sucks that you've gone from a boat to still a boat, but just, a much worse boat. It's hard to think of bluffs for Peter. You have plenty of kings yourself. I think this is just a fold. And I know Dan's a good player, and maybe he had some logic for why he called here, but I think this is a spot where you can let it go. And I do want to say this too, guys. There is some pressure when you're playing these games, maybe just like kind of behind the scenes thoughts here from someone that plays in this kind of game. You're on a huge show, you're on a huge stage, and if you start folding good hands and people are bluffing you, it sucks. So there is a lot more, and by the way, there's also way more incentive to bluff, right? People want to bluff more because they're on these shows, and then they also want to call more because they're on these shows, and you can get into leveling wars in your head, and you can end up just making some bad plays. That's why I usually try in these spots to just try and call it equilibrium and not worry about it. Sevens is just probably too loose. Maybe the solver says it's fine, I don't know. But in my opinion, especially in double board paired board spots when you can have the king, I think you just let this one go, man. But Dan decides to make the call and play $1 million pot to get the day going here on day number 2. Slightly out of order here, but another hand that happened I was involved in against Peter. He opens the hijack to $4,000. Tom Dwan calls the small and king 7 suited. We call in the big blind with 9-8. Everything seems reasonable pre-flop. Flop comes Jack 8-8, another super reasonable flop for Peter with the trips with top pair. Checks over, he bets almost half pot. Tom folds to me with trips. I think in this spot with trips, I think you want to do a mixture of both things. I don't mind either option. They're both fine. We decide to go with the raise option here, making it $25,000 to go. Back over to Peter with trips. This is good news, and I like just calling, which he does decide to do. Take a turn. 7, 10-9 gets there. I have a lot more 10-9 than Peter should have in the hijack. I'm mainly putting Peter on hands like a jack or an overpair in this situation to bet call the flop. I do block 10-9 as well. On the turn, I go for a pretty large-sized bet, betting about 3/4 pot or so. Peter does call, 160K out there. River is a 6. Backdoor flush gets in. I was kind of torn on this river because on one hand, he obviously can have a flush. On the other hand, it's not very likely that many hands can bet call the flop and have a flush because the jack is a heart. So what flush does he really have? Does he have ace king of hearts? Seems pretty unlikely he's calling flop with that, but maybe, I guess. So flush doesn't seem that worrisome. I'm not too worried about boats. I don't think he's going to have 6s or 7s. Those don't call flop. And then there's only 1-8 left in the deck. So I think I'm pretty safe here in general, just to value bet and hope to get called by high pairs. So we decided to bet 2/3 pot on the river. About 115K was my bet. And I get snippety snapped by ace 8. We are off to the races, into the cellar once again. Moving on to my favorite hand that I played on the day. In this hand, action begins. Dwan opens the cutoff with ace 3. We're looked down the butt with jack 10 offsuit. Maybe mixing with the bet every now and then, but we decided to go with the call. Peter comes along in the big blind. We're taking a 3-way flop. Ace, queen 8, 2 diamonds. Flush draw on board. Checks to me. It's interesting. Tom checks an ace. I didn't realize he actually had a top pair in this spot, but anyway. I bet 5K into 12K on the flop here. Peter now with top and bottom check raises to 17K. And for the first time on the show this week, Dwan actually does not pay Peter some money with a good hand and just gets out of the way. Now over to me with jack 10. Clear cut call with the double gutter. King or a 9 will make the nuts. Turns a 6. And Peter now decides to barrel on the big side. Bets about 38,000. It's actually a pretty good bet. I think this is a spot where you're going to want to barrel for the larger size. When you check raise the flop, you're pretty polar, and this is a brick turn. So if you do bet, it should be big. Don't even mind going bigger than this. Now to me with jack 10. A lot of things I'm thinking about here. So to start off with, I do think that if I have a flush draw here, I'm going to be calling. Maybe the weakest of weak flush draws I could let go. Like if I had 4-3 diamonds, I might think about letting something like that go. But generally speaking, I'm going to be calling with a bunch of my flush draws. And I want to have some hands I can rep diamonds. which is nice. This is actually my best straight draw possible. And then I also don't have a diamond in my hand, which makes it a little more likely that he's barreling diamonds himself. If the flush draw bricks, I like to bluff this hand. If the flush draw gets there, I like to bluff this hand. This is just going to be a nice hand to bluff. And, of course, I can make the nuts on a king or a 9. If my opponent does have a hand like ace queen or ace 8, very likely to get paid in those cards, particularly the 9. So all that stuff considered, I do think this is close on the turn. I do think we're getting into territory where you maybe could consider folding, but I think with the amount of equity that we've got, I do think that call is slightly better. And so we call and hope to get there and not have to bluff some stupid spot, which is why we get the perfect card, the 7 of diamonds. The flush has now gotten in. Pierre does check it over to me. And we got a bad situation developing here. We are playing versus a player who has been value betting everyone relentlessly and now checks to me on the flush getting in. I think we have to bluff here. I would prefer to have a diamond, of course. But in this situation, I'm going to have a lot of flushes. I could have some other hands that would want to show down. Really, the only air hand I have here is Jack 10. There's no other straight draw I'm floating. It's just Jack 10. So I know you have Jack 10 quite a lot because a lot of Jack 10's called pre. That's the problem here, but we also do have lots of flushes, and we're going to use a very big size. If I have a flush here, I'm going 1.5x pot to try and get paid from 2 pair. So I think we just simply have to do it. Again, would prefer to have Jack 10 with a diamond, but I think we just have to suck it up and bet 185,000 to go along with all of our flushes. Always nice too here, guys, when you're carving out a big bet and you start fumbling chips. That doesn't feel awkward at all when you're bluffing, you know? Look at this smooth bluff as I just fumble around these chips. But remember, they don't know your hand, so don't ever feel like I can't do this because they saw that I was, shaking or awkward or mishandling. Your opponent doesn't know what you have. I messed a hand up at the end too where I did this too. So yeah, you know what? I've run some bigger bluffs and felt really awkward about them. This one felt great. First off, it's not that big of a bluff for the game. 185k really is a pretty normal sized bet in stakes this large. But the way he was moving his cards around, I really just felt like he was going to fold. I kind of thought he had a hand like ace jack. I was very surprised when I saw later that he ended up folding ace 8 with a diamond. This is definitely a hand you have to call. But maybe he just really felt like I had it in this spot and decided to let it go. To be fair, not a lot of bluffs make sense, but Jack 10 does. So, surprised I got the laydown, but ultimately I did get the fold. And I had prepared a few Chinese sayings before this, learned a couple of them. And so after he folded, I said "Jiao wa," which my understanding means to try harder next time. Which I thought I was just trying to be funny, but maybe it was mean. I don't know. Hope it wasn't disrespectful. Anyway, so played this hand pretty well. Got a bluff through on the rebound. The session rolls on. There were some wild action Dan bluffs in here, but I've already analyzed quite a few hands. I just wanted to go for one last hand. Knight's getting towards the end. We see hands open king, queen of diamonds. Sorry, queen, 5 of diamonds. Dwan 3 bets king, queen of clubs. 740k effective here. Pocket 6 his eyesight to cold 4 bet. I think you mainly fold here, but you do want to occasionally mix in some of your mid pairs into these 4 bet ranges to make sure you have sets on some different boards. 6 is also unblock some wheel ace 3 bets and stuff. But you should mainly just fold this. This is a low frequency play, and RNG'd the low frequency, I think. Anyway, so Dwan, also just getting towards the end of the show, and I wanted to at least have another moment where I got to play a cool hand, being that I saw the writing on the wall for this session being over after this. Anyway, we 4-bet 6s. Dwan calls. We're playing some poker. Flop comes 8-5-5. This is a great flop for the person putting in the raise pre-flop, because if I was bluffing with a hand like ace-5 suited, I got trips. And if I was bluffing with hands like 7-6 suited, I have an open ender. If I had 6-5 or 5-4, I have trips, and if I have an overpair, I got you crushed. And if I have ace-king, my ace and king are very clean. This is one of the best kinds of boards that you can really have. King 5-5 would be the obvious nut best, but we're right about there. Tom checks. I bet very small on the flop, like about 1/4 pot, which is kind of your go-to in 4-bet situations. And Tom decides to float king, queen of clubs here. Really don't like this, because don't get me wrong, if he turns a king or a queen and I am bluffing, I'm going to barrel and he's going to stack me, which is great. But your hand also, if you improve to hands that are quite frequently dominated. Ace king and ace queen definitely going to be some of my most likely hands here. And now when you hit your king or queen, and I have one of those, you're getting stacked. Or if I have aces or kings and you hit your king or queen, you're getting stacked. And if I have a 5, you're getting stacked. So I guess what I'm really saying here is, even though it's a great price, this hand really sucks, and you need some folds on the flop. If he had spades, even the backdoor flush draw, I don't mind it as much. I think it would be fine. Obviously, if you have a flush draw, it's good. But I'd be surprised if in theory land this thing floats versus 1/4. I guess it was closer to 17% pot. You need some folds, guys. It's okay to fold some hands. Can't be that bad to float though, but I do think fold's a bit better than call. Anyway, he does call. Take a turn, 130k out there. Turn is a 3, so nice brick turn. Tom checks. We decide to check back here. Don't see much merit for betting. You're not turn bet. You only better hands will call you, and we get the beautiful, beautiful 6 on the river. Oh, what a beautiful, fine river we have here. And Tom decides to go ahead and bet 72,000. In Tom's shoes, so it does kind of make sense to bet this, right? Because you don't have a heart. Those hands are better to bet. And then if you had a straight draw type of hand, that paired. So I think this is good. I do think this is good. I think I might want to go a little bit. No, this is fine. I like this play. If you're going to call flop, you get this run out. Seems good. He's got plenty of hands like jacks, queens, tens that are all going to want to value bet. You could have a hand like pocket eights or pocket sixes himself. So plenty of hands that want to value bet, and seems fine. Over to me. I felt really torn here because I need to raise. Obviously, I have a boat, but what size do I go? He's mainly going to have mid pairs that don't want to call. I kind of felt like I was supposed to jam here and put those hands in an insane spot. But jamming felt too big, right? If he bets 70, I make it 670. It's just too big, I think. And then I can't value raise aces like that because occasionally I'll trap aces on the turn here. So I raised a size that I could also raise pocket aces on the river, which I think makes sense. I think at the end of the day, my raise here to something like 270, maybe it should have been 250. I think it's good. I'm not sure. It's a confusing one. But either way, when you're not too sure and you're playing deep stack, I do think it's best to use a size that you'd want to use with thinner value bets so that if your opponent gets crazy, you're like, oh, I can have boats, and then I can call your jam. So anyway, we do end up raising here. Some nice chip fumbling. Always good to fumble some chips. And we end up making it about, what was it, 285? I think I should have gone a little smaller. I think 250 would have been, yeah, I made it 290. 250 would have been perfect. Anyway, not too much of a thought process here for Tom. He ends up making a very quick laydown, and we post a $127,000 loss on the day. With all the hand review out of the way, I want to talk about a few different subjects that have come up here, including my thoughts on the game I ended up playing and not being allowed to play on other days. So I want to start off with this. The Peter thing, he hit and ran and left early. 100% for sure that really ruined the vibe of the table when someone smashes a game and leaves. We've all been there. Sucks. Especially when the game is shorthanded and the guy doing it is one of the big recreational players. Sucks. That said, it was my understanding he could not play that long that day. I think. I didn't talk to Peter, obviously. I don't speak Chinese. But I did hear some players talking about it, I thought, earlier on. I'm not entirely sure. I wasn't told anything. But I'm pretty sure that Peter basically was just trying to help the game out by being here for a few hours to make it run. And if that's the case, we should not be giving Peter so much shit. I saw so many comments about this. I think he was just trying to help. I think he had something that he had to do, and I think that he just showed up out of to show support. So let's not pile on Peter. Let's assume the best here. I don't think Peter's the kind of guy where this is really going to be changing his life. It's not like this is a guy that plays $100 tournament and he's like, yeah, yeah, oh, I won 2.5 million. I'll see you guys later. No, I got a thing. I think this is the kind of guy that often plays for these kinds of stakes, and I do not think that we should be grilling him relentlessly over leaving a game when he was just showing up to try and help it run. Okay, that's the first thing. I'd also like to talk about my experience playing, and I guess I want to start off with saying that I feel like I could have handled things a little bit better. At the end of the stream, I was just so tilted, and I missed some pretty good opportunities to be more professional, but also, frankly, when it got down to four-handed, I don't know how I didn't think of this. I should have said, Tom, let's play heads up, or do you want to play heads up? And then we could have had a battle that I think would have been really epic. He might have said no. I guess probably could have said no, but instead I was just so tilted about the fact that this game was going to die, and it was so short, and I had gotten all the money, and I'd taken my time away from my family and my job and come out here, and I was going to end up playing in this, short-handed game that was very tough, and which it's fine if games are tougher. I've been always been a good sport about it, but uh, it's just so different than the original lineup that I was told. All of these things, and I was focused on all this tilting shit rather than just being like, oh, here's a good opportunity to try and do something that could have been really good for the show. I was just too wrapped up in my own world, and so I missed a pretty clear opportunity to do that. So um, I made a mistake there, and then I also just felt like really upset about the way that I was basically treated in this, where I know Feldman did his best. Feldman is a good dude. He runs a great show, but basically, for all these months, I was like, yeah, I'll play whatever. I'll play whatever. Play whatever. This is your lineup. These are the people, and then it just gets different and worse and worse. And then I eventually show up, and it's like the game's on the ropes when I get there, and it's five-handed. I feel bad for Steve. He's obviously a good sport, but it's Steve and four pros basically, and then Peter, he's there for a few hours. It just not a great game, and I guess like I had just really looked forward to this for a long time. Obviously, last year we had a really epic show, and I was expecting something more like that. I think the most important takeaway is I need to recognize on my side that you're not promised anything. Like it's not like you're guaranteed to have an awesome game when you come out here. Uh, the game might not even run, or the game might run for only a few hours. In fact, last time I came out, my day got canceled and moved to the fourth day, and then it became what it became. I think I just need to have a healthier attitude about this, which is don't really try and schedule my life around this and post up in LA and be ready to go and hope to get into good games or expect to get to play with some of the players and maybe in the future consider not playing if I think that it's going to upset me or tilt me. So I think I could have handled it better. It does suck that then they have the game running next couple of days and you're told no pros. Tom's playing. I don't know what happened there. I'm not in the inner workings of this shit, but it is what it is. So definitely some learning lessons for me, and I hope that I represented myself well on the show. And in the future, I guess we'll see what happens, but unlikely that I will be coming back out for this down the road. Okay, that's it for me. Trying not to do too much complaining. I'm very fortunate and lucky. I'm very excited about what we got coming up at Lodge Card Club, and I did get to play for a day, so thankful for that. And thank you for all of the fans that supported me and wanted to see me on the show. I do appreciate that too. Saw a lot of Where's Doug comments. Means a lot to me, guys. Thank you very much for all that support, and I will see you again shortly for day 3 hand review. Peace.